So far we've been working on the user interface for this application here. So if you're not familiar with user interface design, this right here is an example of a UI, or a user interface. The interface is what the user interacts with, but more importantly, we have user experience design, which is essentially how people feel while they're using the UI. Let's quickly switch over to learn a little bit about UX design and what it is and how we can apply it to our project. So what's UX? User experience or UX design is a process design teams use to create products that provide meaningful and relevant experiences to users. In other words, user experience design is a human-first way of designing products, right? Instead of just thinking about putting certain elements into a page and then calling it a day, we actually think about how people will interact with this product and then go back and redesign and make sure that we improve it in a way where people feel good about using them, or even great. So here's an example of a UI versus a UX. A UI is what people see in front of them, the actual interface, whereas UX is how they interact with it, how they use it, how they feel while they're using it. So there's a lot more going on with UX. Great UX is legible to the users, and so this means a great use of fonts and sizes. On the right here, you can see an example of poor UX. This font's not very accessible or easy to read. And in general, try to increase your font sizes and also use easy to read fonts as opposed to something like this. Great UX uses colors in ways that increase and improve contrast. So this is really important here. You want to make sure that you have high contrast in your designs. On the right here, we can see an example of poor UX where it's hard to read the text because it has low contrast. The difference in color or hue between the foreground here, which is the text, and the background, which is kind of a light gray here, is kind of low. So to improve this text, you can either make the text a little bit darker, or if you can lower the background and make it lighter, you can do that as well to help improve the contrast. Spacing is really important. You don't want to overwhelm the user with too much information in one spot. So great UX uses spacing to separate content. And then on the right here, you can see it's kind of overwhelming. There's too much information all squeezed into one area. So that's because there's no spacing between the text or objects there. And in general, just fill most of your design with white space so it's not overwhelming, unless two pieces of content are relevant. So this means that unless you have stuff that are related to each other, try to space them apart as much as you can just to help improve the UX. Cool. So alignment is really important as well. Great UX uses alignment to ensure things feel right. So as you can see here on my left here, everything looks nice and organized and aligned, whereas on the right, it doesn't feel right looking at these shapes because they're completely misaligned. So if you remember, throughout our design, we used alignment tools a lot, as I mentioned before, because this is really important in UX design. Consistency is another big one. You want to make sure you stay consistent with your colors and your UI in order to improve your UX. So for our project, that's why we picked the color scheme so that we stay within a specific color palette or color scheme. So we don't confuse users, right? On the right here, we can see we're introducing some new colors on the right here. So there's a green, unless it has meaning. So for example, if you want to say congrats, so if you want to give, for example, a success type of text to the user, of course you can use green, but try not to use too many colors and too many different types of fonts and things like that, and try to keep it consistent and try to keep your fonts generally the same size and keep relevant content together, right? So you see that text is all the way at the bottom, whereas it should be closer to the other text because they're relevant. We're almost done here. So great UX is easy to use. Simple as that. Buttons are reachable and they're big enough to press. And I can't stress this enough because I've seen a lot of applications where they put the buttons in very hard to reach places, especially on mobile, as you can see on the right here. Generally, you want to avoid having frequently used buttons at the very top. Also, don't make your buttons way too small. especially again on mobile where you're using your fingers to interact with the design. If you make a button that's way too small and maybe someone has a bigger than average hand size, they will likely miss that button. So definitely make your designs accessible to everyone or as many people as you can, really. Sometimes in design, it's very hard to make your design completely accessible to everyone, but it's definitely best to try and make it accessible for everyone to use, or at least your own users. So there's way more to this. Adding great UX to your designs takes time and testing to get it right. So please be patient with it. But you can start by applying these tips to your design, and it's a great way to start. So now it's your turn to make great UX. I've put this slideshow here in your resources. This is something I just put together as a little handbook for your UX that you can apply to your future projects. So feel free to download the PDF and just have it handy somewhere. So next time you're designing your project, you can just remind yourself of a few of these things in case you forget. All right, so we learned a lot about user experience design. And now, as we're designing our mockups, we will keep UX in mind and come back to it and make sure that we add all the proper elements for a great user experience.